to Deep Sleep Stories. If these stories have helped you through restless nights, please leave a review. Reviews are what help this podcast grow, reach more listeners, and stay alive. Without them, even something meaningful can slowly disappear. So if this show has brought you comfort, that small act truly helps keep it going. Now, settle in, and let's begin. Welcome to Deep Sleep Stories, where you can let the day loosen its grip and drift into a gentler tide. Tonight, you'll be carried to a sleepy Coastline Café, where warm light and soft ocean air mingle like a lullaby. Settle into the place where you are resting now. Let your shoulders soften. Let your jaw unclench. If it feels comfortable, allow your eyelids to grow heavy, as though they are learning a quiet, familiar language. Breathe in slowly, as if you're drawing in the calm from the room around you, and breathe out, as if you're releasing every small thread of effort you've been holding. Notice how the breath arrives on its own, patient and unhurried. Notice how it leaves, taking with it the dust of thoughts, the leftover noise, the rushing. Imagine a coastline at evening where the air tastes faintly of salt and the world seems kinder at the edges. Imagine the hush that comes when waves smooth their own stories into the sand, and with each easy breath, you can let yourself drift toward that shore, toward a place that asks nothing from you but your presence. Inhale, soft and slow. Exhale, longer and softer. Let your mind become a lantern with a dimming flame, still glowing, but no longer bright enough to demand anything. Let your thoughts be like seabirds far away, turning in the distance small shapes that do not need to be followed. And now, as you continue to relax, allow the story to begin. Somewhere along a quiet stretch of coast, where the cliffs rounded into gentle dunes, there stood a cafe that most people never noticed until they needed it. It was not hidden exactly. It simply blended with the evening in a way that made it feel natural, like a warm window in a foggy street, like a hearth seen from afar. The cafe sat a little back from the tide line, where seagrass grew in pale waves of its own, and where the wind carried the scent of kelp and clean stone. A narrow path of flattened sand led to its door, and at the edges of that path were smooth shells, arranged as if the ocean itself had placed them there with quiet care. Its sign swayed from a wooden beam above the entrance, creaking in a slow rhythm. The letters were painted in soft, weathered colors that looked like they had been kissed by mist for a long time. Sometimes the sign seemed to read clearly, and sometimes it blurred, as though the air itself was dreaming. The cafe's windows were wide and welcoming, their glass slightly wavy, as if they had once been part of a bottle that washed ashore. Inside, lamplight glowed like honey. Outside, the sea moved with a steady hush, folding and unfolding at the shoreline, never in a hurry. On an evening when the sky was fading from pearl to deep velvet, a traveler wandered along that coast. The traveler had walked without urgency, letting the breeze decide the pace. letting the sand slow each step. There was no need to arrive anywhere quickly. The day had been full of small demands and shifting sounds, and the traveler's mind felt like a room with too many open windows. The traveler's name was Elian. It was a gentle name, the kind that did not clatter when spoken, the kind that fit easily into the hush of the shore. Elian's coat carried the faint scent of roads and rain. A soft scarf was looped at the neck, warmed by the last memory of daylight. The sea wind tugged at loose strands of hair, teasing them toward the horizon. Elian had not planned to find a cafe. The coast had simply called, and Elian had followed as though guided by something older than thought. Sometimes, when life became too loud, Elian sought places where the world spoke softly. A shoreline with its endless breathing waves was one of those places. As Elian walked, the fog began to gather. Not a thick fog, not a frightening one, just a tender veil that softened the cliffs and blurred the distant line where water met sky. The sound of the surf grew rounder, more enveloping, as though the ocean was drawing closer to whisper. And then, through that mist, a warm square of light appeared. Elian paused, not with surprise, but with a sense of recognition. The light seemed to say, "Here, rest here." The cafe came into view with a calm steadiness. Its roof was shingled in driftwood gray. A strand of tiny lanterns hung beneath the eaves, their glow gentle and unflickering, even in the wind. Near the door, a wind chime made of sea glass sang a delicate, irregular music. Each note was like a droplet of sound. Elian stepped closer. The door was painted the color of worn sea foam, and the handle was smooth from countless touches. When Elian pushed it open, a soft bell sounded overhead, low, muted, polite. Warmth gathered around Elian at once, not the sharp heat of a blazing fire, but the steady comfort of a room that had been welcoming people for a long, long time. The air smelled of baked bread, steeping herbs, and something faintly sweet, like vanilla warmed between palms. Beneath those scents was the clean brightness of salt air, as though the sea itself had been invited inside. The cafe's interior was cozy in a way that felt almost protective. Wooden beams crossed the ceiling like outstretched arms. The walls were lined with shelves holding teacups and jars, all labeled in tidy handwriting. Some jars held dried lavender, others held curled strips of citrus peel. There were tins of cocoa, bundles of cinnamon, and small sacks of coffee beans. Each container seemed placed with intention, as if someone had arranged them according to a quiet kind of harmony. Tables were scattered around the room, small and round, each with a candle in a glass holder. The flames were low and steady, making no drama. Chairs were padded with cushions sewn from soft fabrics in ocean colors: deep blue, pale gray, muted green, sandy beige. Along one wall was a long bench draped with knitted blankets, folded neatly and waiting. A fireplace murmured in the corner. Its fire did not crackle loudly. It simply glowed and breathed, as if it too were listening to the sea beyond the windows. Behind the counter stood the cafe keeper, a person whose presence felt like a warm cup, cradled between hands. The cafe keeper's hair was silver-streaked and loosely gathered, and their face held a calm smile that did not ask questions. Their eyes were the color of storm clouds seen from a safe distance, soft, watchful, kind. "Come in," the cafe keeper said, voice low as a tide moving over stones. "You've brought the wind with you." Elian exhaled, and the exhale felt like setting down a bag that had been carried too far. "It's colder outside than it looked," Elian murmured, though the words were not a complaint. They were simply an observation spoken into a place that felt safe enough to listen. The cafe keeper nodded, as if cold evenings were expected guests. "Sit wherever you like," they said, "and if your bones want warmth, I have something that helps." Elian's gaze moved around the room. There were other patrons, but the cafe was quiet. A couple sat near the window speaking in murmurs. A solitary figure read a book by candlelight, turning pages slowly, as if each page was a small shore to land on. In a corner near the fireplace, a striped cat curled in a basket, its paws tucked under, its breathing slow and even. Elian chose a seat near the window. From there, the ocean could be seen, a shifting darkness with pale threads of foam. The fog softened everything beyond the glass, making the world outside look like a painting still drying. The cafe keeper approached with an unhurried grace, setting a small menu on the table. The menu was written on thick paper, the ink slightly blurred in places, as though it had absorbed sea air. Elian glanced at it. There were familiar offerings: tea, coffee, soup, bread. But there were also things that sounded like they belonged to dreams. Moon milk with cardamom, drowsy cocoa, seafoam steep, and something simply called the night cup. Elian looked up. The cafe keeper had not asked what Elian wanted, as if they already knew. "The night cup," the cafe keeper said softly, and it was not a suggestion so much as a gentle tide pulling toward shore. "It's warm and kind. It doesn't push you into sleep. It just reminds you how to drift." Elian's shoulders loosened again, as though hearing that was enough to begin. "That sounds perfect," Elian replied. The cafe keeper nodded once and moved away, their steps quiet on the wooden floor. Elian sat and listened. The cafe held a layered hush, the low murmur of the fire, the faint clink of a spoon against ceramic, the far-off sigh of waves beyond the windows. Even the wind chime near the door seemed to choose its notes carefully, offering them only when the room had space to receive them. As Elian watched the fog shift outside, the candle on the table made a small, warm pool of light. The flame's reflection trembled in the window, a second candle floating in the dark. The striped cat in the corner lifted its head, blinked slowly, and then, without urgency, stood and padded across the room. It moved like a thought that had decided to become gentle. It approached Elian's table, paused, and looked up. Elian held still, allowing the cat to decide. After a moment, the cat hopped into the empty chair opposite and curled into a neat circle, tail wrapped around paws. Its eyes half closed, as if the chair had always belonged to it. Elian smiled. It was a small smile, the kind that barely touched the face but warmed the chest. Outside, the ocean continued its patient breathing. When the cafe keeper returned, they carried a tray with a single cup and a small plate. The cup was wide and simple, glazed in a color that looked like deep sea at dusk. The plate held a biscuit shaped like a small crescent, dusted lightly with sugar that sparkled in the candlelight. The cafe keeper set the cup down carefully. Steam rose in a slow spiral, carrying a scent that was both familiar and hard to name. There was chamomile, perhaps. There was a hint of honey and something like toasted oats. There was also a faint, cool sweetness that reminded Elian of fog rolling over dunes. "Drink slowly," the cafe keeper said. "It likes patience." Elian wrapped hands around the cup. The warmth seeped into fingers, then into wrists, then deeper, as though it could travel through bone and muscle and find places that had been tense for too long. The cat opposite blinked again, unbothered, already drifting. Elian took a sip. The taste was gentle and layered. It was not sharp or surprising. It was like sinking into a blanket that had been warmed by the sun earlier in the day. The first note was soft sweetness, then came something floral and soothing. Then lingering at the end was a faint saltiness, like the memory of sea air on lips. As Elian drank, the world seemed to slow. Not in a dramatic way, not as though time had stopped, but as though time had remembered it did not need to run. The cafe keeper moved away again, leaving Elian to the cup and the quiet. Outside, the fog thickened slightly, turning the coastline into a soft silhouette. Somewhere out there, a lighthouse swept its beam across the water. The light appeared briefly through the mist, pale and slow, then disappeared, then returned. It was a steady reassurance, never hurried, never demanding attention. Elian took another sip, then reached for the crescent biscuit. It crumbled delicately, melting into sweetness and warmth. The simple comfort of it was enough to make Elian's eyes feel heavier. A long while passed like that. Or perhaps it only felt long because everything had become softer. Eventually, the cafe keeper approached again, wiping the counter with a cloth that smelled faintly of citrus. They glanced toward Elian with a look that was both curious and calm. "You've been carrying a lot," the cafe keeper said quietly, as though speaking to a tide pool, careful not to disturb its surface. Elian could have answered with details, could have described the day, the weeks, the small stresses that piled like pebbles in pockets. But the cafe did not seem to want details. It seemed to want only truth, spoken simply. Elian nodded. "It feels like my thoughts won't stop moving," Elian admitted. "Like waves that won't settle?" The cafe keeper's smile deepened slightly. "Then you're in the right place," they said. "This cafe was built for wandering minds." Elian's gaze drifted to the shelves of jars, to the blankets folded on the bench, to the cat now fully asleep in the chair opposite. "How does it work?" Elian asked, voice barely above a whisper. The cafe keeper leaned slightly closer, not invading space, just sharing warmth. "It doesn't do anything you aren't already capable of. they said. It simply reminds your body what it knows, that you can rest, that you can release, that you can trust the night. Elian looked back toward the window. The lighthouse beam swept again, pale and patient. The cafe keeper continued, "If you'd like, there's a little path behind the cafe. It leads down to the water where the tide pools are. Sometimes it helps to listen to the sea from closer up. Sometimes it helps to collect something small and smooth, something you can hold as a reminder." Elian's fingers tightened gently around the cup. The warmth was still there, steady. "I think I'd like that," Elian said. The cafe keeper nodded and gestured toward a side door near the fireplace. "Take a lantern," they said, pointing to a shelf where small lanterns sat, each with a candle inside. "The fog likes to play tricks, but it's friendly here." Elian stood slowly, feeling the pleasant heaviness in limbs, as though the body was already preparing for rest. The cat in the chair did not stir. It simply breathed, unconcerned. Elian took a lantern. Its handle was cool metal, the candle inside already lit, flame small and steady. The cafe keeper opened the side door, and a softer, kind of cold slipped in, damp, salt sweet, full of night. Outside, the air wrapped around Elian like a shawl. The fog was thicker here, but not oppressive. It made the world intimate, narrowing it to lantern light, to the hush of waves, to the faint rustle of seagrass. Behind the cafe, the path was lined with smooth stones. They glimmered faintly with moisture. Elian walked slowly, lantern swinging in a gentle arc, painting warm circles on the ground. The sound of the sea grew louder as the path descended. Not loud in a harsh way, but present, all-encompassing, like breathing heard from within a shared room. The waves rolled in, broke softly, then pulled back, whispering over sand and rock. At the bottom of the path, the tide pools waited. They were small pockets of ocean caught between rocks, each holding a miniature world. In the lantern light, the pools reflected warm gold, then deepened into dark mirrors. Tiny anemones clung to stones like flower buds. Small crabs moved sideways with quiet purpose. Strands of seaweed waved slowly as though practicing dance. Elian crouched near one pool and held the lantern closer, careful not to lean too far. The pool's surface trembled slightly with the movement of the sea nearby, and the tremble made the reflected light shimmer. For a while, Elian simply watched. The small creatures went about their gentle lives. The seaweed swayed. The anemones opened and closed in slow pulses. Everything moved as if it had all the time in the world. The fog, too, moved slowly, curling around rocks, then drifting away. The lighthouse beam swept across the mist again, pale and distant. Elian breathed in and out, matching the rhythm of the waves. Inhale, the scent of salt and stone. Exhale, the release of tension. It was easy here to let thoughts pass like the lighthouse light, appearing briefly, then fading, then returning without urgency. Elian reached toward a patch of sand between rocks, where shells had gathered. There were shells shaped like spirals, shells like small fans, shells broken into smooth pieces by time and tide. Elian picked up a small pale shell that fit neatly into the palm. It was cool and smooth, its edges rounded, its surface faintly ridged, like a fingerprint left by the sea. Holding it, Elian felt something settle. Not everything, not the whole weight of life, but a small part. A pebble slipping from a pocket, a knot loosening. The waves continued to come and go. As Elian stood again, lantern light wobbling gently, something caught the corner of the eye, a faint glimmer along the waterline like tiny stars scattered on the wet sand. Elian stepped closer. The glimmer was not constant. It appeared when the waves pulled back, leaving a thin sheen of water. In that sheen, little sparks of light flickered and faded. The effect was subtle and beautiful, as if the sea were quietly remembering the sky. Elian watched, feeling the mind become quieter with every breath. The shell rested in the palm, a small anchor. A soft voice came from behind, carried on the wind like a secret. "The sea keeps little lights," it said. Elian turned. The cafe keeper stood at the edge of the path, lantern in hand, their silhouette softened by fog. They had not approached loudly. They had simply arrived as naturally as a wave. "Is it real?" Elian asked, though the question felt less like skepticism and more like wonder. The cafe keeper smiled. "It's real enough," they said. "Some call it living light in the water. Some call it the sea dreaming. Either way, it's gentle." They stepped closer, stopping at a respectful distance. "How do you feel?" they asked. Elian considered. The body felt heavier in a pleasant way. The mind felt less crowded. The air felt softer against skin. "Quieter," Elian said. The cafe keeper nodded. "Good. Then you can come back in if you like. The fire is still warm. And there's a bench with blankets that doesn't mind being borrowed." Elian looked back at the tide pools, at the small worlds held between rocks. The sea continued its patient motion. The lighthouse beam swept again, then faded. "I think I'm ready," Elian said, voice low. Together they walked back up the path. The fog parted and gathered again, like slow curtains. The cafe's warm windows appeared ahead, glowing steadily, waiting. Inside, the air welcomed Elian once more. The scent of herbs and bread wrapped around the senses. The fire's glow seemed deeper now, more inviting. The quiet patrons remained, each in their own soft world. The solitary reader turned another page. The couple by the window leaned closer, their conversation a gentle murmur. Elian returned the lantern to its shelf. The cafe keeper pointed toward the bench along the wall. "There," they said softly. "If you'd like to rest." Elian approached the bench. A blanket lay folded neatly, knit in a pattern that resembled waves. Elian unfolded it and draped it around shoulders. The fabric was warm, slightly heavy, comforting. It felt like being held without pressure. The cafe keeper returned with a small bowl of soup. simple, steaming, fragrant. Just a little, they said, not to fill you too much, only to soothe. Elian ate slowly, spoonful by spoonful. The soup tasted of roasted vegetables and herbs with a hint of butter. Each bite seemed to calm the body further, smoothing out sharp edges. When the bowl was empty, the cafe keeper took it away and returned with a fresh cup. This one smaller, filled with something pale and creamy. Steam rose softly. "This is warm milk with spices," the cafe keeper said. "A little honey, a little cardamom, a little something you don't need to name." Elian smiled faintly and took the cup. The warmth seeped into hands again, familiar now, like a ritual the body remembered. The striped cat, having moved at some point, now lay curled at the end of the bench, pressed into the blanket as if it belonged there. Its breathing was deep and steady, a quiet metronome. Elian sipped the spiced milk. It tasted like comfort, made liquid. The mind, already quieter, drifted further from its usual edges. The cafe keeper dimmed a few lanterns, lowering the room's brightness by degrees, like twilight easing into night. Candle flames remained small and steady. The fire continued its soft glow. Outside the windows, the fog thickened, hiding the coastline and leaving only a suggestion of sea. The lighthouse beams still appeared now and then, pale and slow, a gentle sweep across the mist. The cafe keeper moved behind the counter, tidying without sound. Their motions were unhurried, graceful, as though they were part of the cafe's breathing. They wiped a cup, set it down, adjusted a jar on a shelf. Each movement seemed to whisper, "There is time. There is no need to rush." Elian leaned back against the wall, blanket around shoulders, cup cradled in hands. The shell rested in the palm, smooth and cool, a small piece of shoreline brought indoors. Thoughts drifted through Elian's mind, but they were slower now, like clouds moving over a moon. They did not snag. They did not demand. They simply passed. The cafe keeper's voice came softly from the counter. "This place is here whenever it's needed," they said, not loudly, not as an announcement, but as if speaking to the room itself. Some people find it once, some find it many times. The coast remembers. Elian's eyelids felt heavy. The warmth in the body felt steady. The sound of the sea outside was a constant hush, as soothing as breath. The solitary reader's book closed quietly. The couple by the window stood, exchanged a small smile with the cafe keeper, and left through the main door, the bell above it sounding low and polite. The fog swallowed them gently as if tucking them away. The cafe grew even quieter. The striped cat sighed in sleep. A soft sound then settled deeper into the blanket. Elian's cup emptied slowly. When it was finished, Elian set it on the small table beside the bench. The cafe keeper noticed, and without a word, came to take it away, moving like a shadow, made of warmth. They returned and placed a small candle on the table, its flame lower than the others, as if it too were ready to sleep. "For softness," the cafe keeper whispered. Elian nodded, though the movement was small, almost dreamlike. Outside, the lighthouse beam swept once more, then faded. The sea continued its slow breathing. The fog pressed gently against the windows like a curious, quiet animal. Elian's fingers loosened around the shell. It rested on the blanket now, close enough to feel, close enough to remember. The cafe keeper spoke again, quieter still. You don't have to hold your thoughts tonight, they said. Let them float. Let them drift out like boats untied from shore. Elian's breathing deepened. Inhale the warmth of the cafe. Exhale the cool softness of fog. The room seemed to sway slightly, not in a dizzying way, but in the gentle way a cradle might sway. The fire's glow blurred at the edges. Candle flames became little golden seeds of light. Elian's mind began to slip into that tender space between waking and sleep, where sounds become softer and meanings become less important. The cafe keeper's movements behind the counter became part of the background, like the sound of distant waves. The striped cat's breathing remained steady, inviting. The cafe keeper walked closer one last time and adjusted the blanket around Elian's shoulders, careful and respectful, as though tucking in a child without waking them. Their hands were warm. Their touch was light. Rest, they whispered. Elian's eyes closed fully now. The story of the day with all its details began to dissolve. The future with all its imagined demands drifted farther away. All that remained was warmth, hush, and the slow rhythm of the sea. The cafe seemed to exist in a pocket of night where nothing needed to happen. The waves outside continued their patient motion. In and out, in and out. The fog held the world gently, softening every edge. The lighthouse kept sweeping its quiet reassurance, even when it could not be seen. The cafe keeper returned to the counter and sat on a stool, hands folded, watching the room with calm affection. The fire lowered itself to embers. The candles burned smaller, their flames still steady, never flickering wildly. In this sleepy coastline cafe, everything slowed. Breaths became deeper. Thoughts became lighter, muscles softened, and as the night continued, the cafe held its warmth like a promise. The sea breathed. The fog drifted. The lighthouse watched. Elian slept, wrapped in a blanket that felt like waves made gentle with a shell nearby as a quiet reminder that the shore was always there. The cafe keeper remained, listening, content, as though this was their favorite kind of evening, an evening where rest arrived naturally, like tide returning. The room grew dimmer, softer, quieter. Even the air seemed to yawn, stretching into stillness. And now you can let yourself drift the same way. Let your breathing be slow and easy. Let your body sink deeper into comfort. Let the mind float unbothered like a lantern on calm water. Nothing needs to be solved. Nothing needs to be carried. Only this gentle hush. Only this soft warmth. The sleepy Coastline Café fades into the background as if it is closing its curtains and leaving a small light on for you somewhere in the mist. Waves whisper, firelight glows, blankets settle. Good night, dear traveler. Sleep well.